Sorry, the last recording cut off. I'll go back to that paragraph I was reading when it stopped. Attached to that email was information about the Christian Brothers Scholarship. It read, "These scholarships cover full tuition and fees. Only 16 are awarded each year. The average SAT score is 1350. I suddenly understood the importance of these SAT tests, and that Anne was doing for me what a mother does for her own child. So on October 15th, when I sent Anne and Rich my recommendation letters and my personal essay, I addressed the accompanying note, "Dear Mom and Dad." It didn't feel strange writing such intimate words to people I had not yet met. On the contrary, it felt right. I ended the letter with, "I love you." It looked spare on the page, not as robust as I wanted it to come across, so I drew a big heart around it. That looked much better. Right now it's Caitlin, November 2002. Wallace came to visit the last weekend in October, and then every weekend after that. I can tell he was really having a hard time adjusting to life at Temple. At Marius, we study on the weekends, Wallace told us that first day. But at Temple, everyone just wants to get drunk. I don't understand it. Richie laughed. "Your way is better, Wallace," he said. "Trust me." "I think so too, but my roommate says it's why I'm having difficulties finding friends," Wallace said. My hatred of his roommate grew deeper that day. "Do what you think is right," my mom chimed in. "You will meet people who feel the same way." I wasn't so sure. Wallace seemed so lost. I realized that we had to carefully choose the right place for Martin. Wallace seemed more introverted than Martin, but I still wanted to make sure that Martin went to a school that would welcome him. No one at Temple seemed to care that Wallace had come all the way from Zimbabwe to study there. That really upset me. It also reminded me of all the times my high school friends teased me about Martin. I wanted to shake all those idiots by their shoulders and shout, "You are missing an amazing opportunity right now." People are so scared of what they don't know. It's a terrible mistake. Mom invited Wallace to spend Thanksgiving with our family, and we took lots of pictures to send to Martin. It was during that long weekend when we realized how badly Wallace was struggling. By then, Richie had been accepted to Temple to start in January. Since he was planning to commute to school and could drive Wallace back and forth, my parents invited Wallace to move in with us until we could find him better accommodations and a nicer roommate. I wrote Martin to tell him the news and to wish him luck on the SAT exams. I knew he was scheduled to take them on December 7th in Harar. I bombed mine, but it didn't matter. For Martin, these tests were crucial. "Break a leg," I wrote, as my PS. Just in case he didn't understand what I meant, I added, "That's American for good luck." Right. This is Martin, December 2002. We sat for final exams that November in Nyanga and had to wait until January for the results. We would all be back home by then. There was no graduation at Marius Brothers. Instead, Mr. Muzawazi hosted a final party in early December. Most of my friends were headed to Harar for university that January. A few were going to England, and one guy was going to Canada. 2 others had applied for early admission to American colleges and had been accepted. I was the only one without a definite plan. While my friends all had their places secured, they also had opinions for where I should go. "Harvard is the place," Bonaventure said. "I hear Princeton is even better," Cornelius countered. They were both planning to study medicine at the University of Zimbabwe. At the party, they weighed all the pros and cons of my options: Brown, UPenn, Stanford, Villanova. "Guys," I said, interrupting their fun, "I'd be happy at any of these places. I just need one to say yes to a full scholarship." Both friends fell silent. They understood how high the stakes were. I had not applied anywhere else. If none of the U.S. colleges worked out, I'd have to rethink everything. Before I left Nyanga for good, I went to Harar to take the SATs. My American mother had arranged everything. She paid up front for the exam and then wired me money to the local bank in Nyanga, so I had enough for the bus ticket and pocket money. I stayed with Aloise and Seki the night before the exam. I hadn't seen them since they helped me get into Marius. I arrived at the test site 45 minutes early. I had been awake all night. Whether it was from nerves or excitement, I didn't know. But I knew taking this important test on no sleep could be a problem. I watched nervously as 24 or more students entered the room. All of them came from wealthy families. I could tell by their shoes. The test was more difficult than I had anticipated. I'd never taken an exam like that, and I worried I did not do well. The verbal section was very challenging. I struggled through it, but then I shook that thought from my head. There was no time to doubt. I took the bus back to Nyanga and gathered my things, and then continued on to Matari the next day. Before I left that majestic campus, I popped in to see Mr. Musawazi for the last time as a Marist Brothers student. I was among the last students to leave, so the campus was void of the usual hum of student life. I knocked on his door and heard the thumps echo through the great hall I had first walked 2 years earlier. "Enter," Mr. Musawazi's voice boomed from the other side. I opened the door and saw him sitting behind his desk. Finally, instead of having to convince him of anything, I simply wanted to thank him. "Sir, if it weren't for you, I'd be stuck in Chisamba Singles," I explained. Martin here interrupted me. "You don't get stuck." "I try not to, sir," I said. "But you do succeed," he replied. "I wish you continued success, wherever you land." "Thank you, sir," I said, bowing as I backed out of his office. "And don't forget to keep in touch," his voice bellowed down the hallway after me. Back home, I made daily trips to the only internet cafe in Mutare to keep up my correspondence with Anne and Caitlin. Now with my A-levels and SATs behind me, I can concentrate on college admissions 100%. And that brings us to part 6 of the book called American Dream. Okay, now we're with Caitlin, January 2003. Martin's SAT scores were sent to my mother's email address in mid-January. He did not do as well as we had hoped. "In an ideal world, these tests don't matter," she said. "But our world isn't ideal, and this is bad news." "They can't be worse than mine," I said. "That would be impossible," my mom deadpanned. "But seriously, yours did not matter. His mean everything. He got an 1100, which is great for a kid from Chisamba Singles, but not good enough to get him that full scholarship to LaSalle." "What are we going to do?" I asked. "We need a new plan," she said. We brainstormed ways to raise money for Martin. "You write the U.S. Embassy in Harar, and I will get in touch with Mr. Musawazi," Mom said. "2 schools have already offered partial scholarships. Maybe we can get a Zimbabwe sponsor to do the rest." I had a contact at the U.S. Embassy already from when we were trying to figure out where Martin could take the SATs in Zimbabwe. Her name was Rebecca Ziegler-Mano. It was 10:30 p.m. in the U.S., but I wanted her to read this as soon as she got to work the next day. I reminded her who I was and my relationship to Martin, and then I cut straight to the point. "We are searching desperately for scholarship money for Martin. My parents have 2 of us in college presently and are unable to take on the burden of a third tuition. They have paid all his application fees and arranged for him to take his SATs as well as forward those results to many different schools. They have currently spent over $1,000 and countless hours trying to help Martin receive a U.S. education. But scholarships, both merit and need-based, are rare." I asked her if she had any contacts or thoughts whatsoever as to who might be willing to help sponsor Martin. I signed off with, "Any help would be appreciated," and then hit send. I heard the whoosh sound that emails make when they are soaring off into cyberspace, and imagined a letter folded in an airplane shape, leaving Hatfield and landing on Rebecca's desk in Harar within minutes. Then I switched off the computer and bowed my head in prayer. "Dear God, please help me find a way to bring Martin to the United States." I made the sign of the cross and hoped God would not think badly of me for suddenly turning to him at this moment. We needed all the help we could muster. Now we have Martin, January 2003. My SAT scores arrived first, and they were not nearly as high as I had hoped. This was bad news. I had one last chance. The SAT-2 was in mid-January, which was another version of the test, and so a second chance to do well. I took that and then I stayed on in Harar for another week to gather information about applying for an American visa. I was also awaiting my A-level results, which came around the same time. Finally, some good news. I received 2 A's, one in math, one in chemistry, and one B for physics. I took these results to the Ministry of Education to apply for a temporary teaching position, a popular thing to do for students who don't go straight to university. I wouldn't hear from American schools until April at the earliest, and even then I wouldn't have to leave until August. That meant I had 8 months to start making money. We have an immediate opening for a science teacher, the minister told me that afternoon at my appointment. Great, I said. Where? Chigodoro, he replied. I'd never heard of such a place. It's 4 hours west of Mutari, and another 4 hours south of Marundera, he explained. One school services a dozen or more villages. You'll be a great asset to your students. I thought of Rabbit, who had come from the rural areas and was just starting his second year at medical school. I'll do it, I said. The pay was nominal, but enough to cover my basic expenses. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. Report as soon as possible, the minister said. They've been waiting for a science teacher for 2 years now. I shook his hand. It felt good knowing I might have something useful to offer to the less fortunate than I. Before I left for Harar, I popped into an internet cafe to let Caitlin and Anne know I'd be teaching in an area where there was surely no internet, let alone electricity. I promised to keep in touch through letters. I also sent Anne the list of things I needed for my visa. I knew this was premature, but I decided it was better to plan ahead. I added, well, this time I feel I did quite well on the SAT too. I think I made it this time. I love you all. I can't wait to be on U.S. soil. And then I signed off with my new favorite goodbye, a string of X's and O's that Caitlin had recently taught me was American for hugs and kisses. Okay, now we're February 2003. It's Caitlin. Rebecca Ziegler-Mano responded the very next day. She promised to keep her eyes open for opportunities, but made it clear that she did not expect any to present themselves. The economic troubles in this country are dismal, she wrote. I did not have the heart to share the news with Martin, especially since his last email to our family was so hopeful. The line, I can't wait to be on U.S. soil, made me tense up. What if we couldn't pull this off? My mom was still waiting to hear from Mr. Muzawazi. She had sent him a similar request for Zimbabwean sponsors, thinking perhaps the Delta Corporation that sponsored Martin for Marist would be willing to do the same for an American university. He responded on January 30th. My mother showed me the email, and I understood why she looked so defeated. I hope all is well with Martin. He is a committed and hard-working student with outstanding performance in mathematics. Unfortunately, our contacts from here are limited, and there is no one that we can recommend to assist Martin. The economic situation is very difficult. Dismal and difficult were the words swirling through my head that February, as we waited for universities to respond to his application. Meanwhile, Damon continued to pester me about the amount of time I was spending on my college courses. I finally lost it one night. He started picking on me again for not being able to go bowling with him and his friends on a Thursday night. It's a school night, Damon, I said. I have homework. Just blow it off, he responded. It's not a big deal. Dismal and desperate started whipping around in my brain like empty plastic bags in a wind tunnel. It's a huge deal, I shouted, stunned by how loud and angry my voice sounded. I know I can blow it off, but I don't want to. What's your problem? He said. Seriously? I asked. You know how hard my mom and I are working to find Martin a scholarship. You know how upset I am at the thought that he may not be able to come to the United States to study and fulfill his dreams. Oh, geez, not Martin again, he said. I'm so sick of your pen pal. I saw red. Well, guess what, Damon? I'm so sick of you. Ooh, just kidding. I was shouting again. Leave Martin out of this. It's not about him. It's about me. I don't give you a hard time for not wanting more out of your life, so why are you constantly criticizing me? You used to be more fun, he said quietly. I miss that Caitlin. Well, that Caitlin has grown up, I said, retaining my composure, and she cares more about college than bowling. I held back from adding, "and you."